In 2021, what seemed like a regular suburban family dinner ended with a tragic and shocking discovery. Karen Sullivan, a loving mother and wife, had been keeping a secret that would tear her family apart. She wasn't just the doting mother everyone knew her as she was hiding an affair. And not with some stranger, but with her own daughter Megan's boyfriend, Tyler. What started as a secret romance turned into something far darker and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. No one could have guessed how this love triangle would end in such a brutal and violent way. What began as whispers behind closed doors exploded into a confrontation that left blood on the floor and lives forever changed. A family that seemed ordinary from the outside was now the focus of a gruesome crime. Today we'll take you through the story of a betrayal so deep it led to a deadly fight between a mother, a daughter, and the man they both loved. How did a family collapse in such a tragic way? And what really happened on that final day? This is the story of Karen Sullivan, a mother whose dark secret ended in murder. Karen Sullivan's life seemed perfect on the outside. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood with her husband Paul and their daughter Megan. Megan had been dating Tyler Reed for nearly a year, and it looked like a normal, happy family. But under the surface, things were falling apart in ways that no one could have predicted. It started slowly, with small moments that went unnoticed at first. Karen, now in her mid-40s, was feeling neglected. Her marriage to Paul had lost its spark after years of routine and responsibility. Paul was always busy with work, and the connection between them had grown cold. Karen, longing for attention and affection, found herself in a vulnerable place. That's when Tyler came into the picture, not as Megan's boyfriend, but as someone who could fill the emptiness she had been feeling for so long. Tyler, who was in his mid-20s, was charismatic and confident. He had that easy charm that drew people in. Karen noticed the way he paid attention to her, the way he made her feel seen. At first it was just casual conversations, a little more eye contact than usual. But over time, those moments grew into something more dangerous. Karen found herself looking forward to the times when Megan wasn't around, and Tyler would stay behind after a family dinner or gathering. What began as an innocent friendship turned into something Karen never expected: a secret affair. The affair wasn't planned. It started with one mistake, a moment where both Karen and Tyler crossed a line they knew they shouldn't have. But once that line was crossed, there was no going back. The thrill of keeping the relationship a secret made it even more addictive for Karen. Tyler wasn't just her daughter's boyfriend anymore, he was the escape from her unhappy marriage. But secrets have a way of coming out, and this one was no different. Karen and Tyler tried to keep things hidden, meeting in secret when they knew Megan wouldn't be home. Karen felt guilty, but the attention Tyler gave her was something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't long before they started taking bigger risks, spending time together in ways that would raise suspicion if anyone paid close enough attention. Meanwhile, Megan was oblivious. She was busy with her own life, focusing on her college classes and hanging out with friends. She had no reason to doubt her mother, and she trusted Tyler completely. To her, their relationship was solid. She had no idea that the person she loved was hiding a dark secret with her own mother. As the affair continued, it became harder for Karen and Tyler to hide it. Karen's behavior began to change, and Paul noticed. She was distant, distracted, and often absent-minded when they were together. Paul assumed it was just the stress of daily life and didn't push the issue. But other people were starting to notice the tension, especially Megan's best friend, Liam. Liam had known Megan for years and had always been protective of her. He was the kind of friend who paid attention to the little details, and lately he had noticed that something seemed off. Megan had mentioned a few times that her mom and Tyler seemed unusually close, but she brushed it off, thinking it was just in her head. But Liam had seen things that didn't add up. The way Karen and Tyler looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. The small touches that lingered too long. Liam started to suspect that something was going on. Liam wasn't sure how to bring it up to Megan. He didn't want to accuse anyone of something so serious without proof, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The more he watched, the more convinced he became that Karen and Tyler were hiding something. He decided to start paying closer attention. One night, after a family dinner at the Sullivans' house, Liam noticed Tyler leaving much later than usual. Megan had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day of studying, but Tyler stayed behind with Karen. Liam, curious and concerned, quietly followed Tyler as he walked out of the house. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Karen and Tyler were standing too close, their body language far too intimate for a casual goodbye. Liam knew he had to tell Megan, but he struggled with how to do it. He didn't want to hurt her, but she deserved to know the truth. The next day, he sat her down and explained what he had seen. At first, Megan was in denial. She couldn't believe that her own mother would betray her like that. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The late nights, the lingering looks, Megan realized that Liam was right. Megan's world crumbled. The shock of discovering that the two people she trusted most had been lying to her was more than she could handle. She felt betrayed, angry, and humiliated. But instead of confronting them right away, she decided to gather more information. She wanted to be sure, to have proof before she said anything. Megan started paying closer attention to both Tyler and her mother. She watched their interactions, looking for signs that Liam had been right. It didn't take long for her to find what she was looking for. One afternoon, Megan came home early from class, and what she saw left her stunned. Tyler and Karen, alone in the living room, clearly in the middle of an intimate moment. In that instant, the truth was undeniable. Megan felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. She stormed out of the house, not saying a word, and drove away, her mind racing. She couldn't believe that her own mother had done this to her. The anger she felt was overwhelming, but more than that, she felt lost. Her relationship with Tyler was over, and she couldn't imagine how she would ever be able to forgive her mother. But the situation was about to get worse. The affair wasn't just a secret that Megan had uncovered, it was a ticking time bomb that would soon explode in the most violent way possible. In the days that followed, Megan struggled with what to do. She considered confronting Karen and Tyler, but every time she thought about it, the anger and hurt stopped her. Instead, she confided in Liam, who encouraged her to confront the truth head-on. But Megan wasn't ready for that. She felt trapped between the pain of her discovery and the fear of what would happen next. Meanwhile, Karen was starting to sense that something was wrong. Megan had been distant, avoiding her whenever possible, and Tyler was acting strange as well. The affair had started to lose its thrill, and Karen was beginning to realize the damage it was causing. She knew it couldn't go on much longer, but she didn't know how to end it without everything falling apart. The pressure of keeping the affair hidden was taking its toll on both Karen and Tyler. The excitement they once felt was replaced by guilt and fear. They were both afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. But what they didn't realize was that the truth was already out and the consequences were coming. The situation finally came to a head one evening when Megan decided that she couldn't stay silent any longer. She confronted her mother in the kitchen, her voice shaking with anger as she demanded to know the truth. Karen, caught off guard, tried to deny it at first, but the look in Megan's eyes told her that it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Megan's confrontation quickly escalated into a full-blown argument. The years of betrayal, lies, and hurt came pouring out as mother and daughter yelled at each other. Tyler, who had come over that evening, walked in on the argument and tried to calm them down, but his presence only made things worse. Megan turned her anger on him, accusing him of ruining her life and destroying her family. The argument spiraled out of control. What started as a confrontation quickly turned violent as emotions ran high. In the heat of the moment, Tyler grabbed a kitchen knife, desperate to stop the argument from escalating further. But instead of calming things down, the situation took a deadly turn. The knife, meant as a threat, ended up in Megan's chest. The room went silent as the reality of what had just happened hit them. Megan collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around her. Karen screamed, rushing to her daughter's side, but it was too late. Tyler stood frozen, the knife still in his hand, unable to comprehend what he had just done. The next few hours were a blur. The police were called and Tyler was arrested on the spot. Karen, inconsolable, was taken in for questioning as well. The affair, the lies, the betrayal, it had all led to this moment, a moment that would haunt them forever. Megan was gone, and nothing could bring her back. The tragedy that had started as a secret affair had ended in murder, and now the lives of everyone involved were changed forever. After Megan's murder, the entire Sullivan family was thrown into chaos. The news of her death spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, and what seemed like a typical suburban family was now the center of a shocking crime. The police had arrived at the scene soon after Tyler had called 911 in a panic, and by then it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. Detective Emma Walsh was assigned to lead the investigation. With years of experience handling violent crimes, she was no stranger to difficult cases. But even she was taken aback by the tragic nature of this one, a young woman killed in the heat of a domestic argument, involving her own mother and her boyfriend. When she first arrived at the Sullivan home, the scene was tense and heartbreaking. Karen was still in shock, sitting on the living room floor, crying uncontrollably as paramedics pronounced her daughter dead. Tyler, pale and trembling, was handcuffed and led to a squad car. He offered no resistance as he was arrested, still too stunned to process what had happened. The knife he had used to kill Megan had already been bagged as evidence, and bloodstains marked the once pristine kitchen floor where the final moments of Megan's life had unfolded. As Detective Walsh began piecing together the details, it became clear that this was no ordinary crime. The affair between Karen and Tyler was not yet known to the police, but the tension in the house was impossible to miss. It was the kind of tension that suggested more than just an argument gone wrong. There was something deeper, something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Karen's husband, Paul, had been out of town on business when the murder happened. He rushed home as soon as he got the call, but by the time he arrived, the scene had already been cleared. Megan's body had been taken to the morgue, Tyler was in custody, and Karen was being questioned by the police. Paul was devastated. He couldn't understand how things had escalated to this point. The last time he had seen Megan, everything seemed fine. He had no idea that his marriage had been crumbling behind his back, or that his wife had been hiding such a dangerous secret. When Detective Walsh sat down with Karen for her first round of questioning, Karen was barely able to speak. Her words came out in broken sobs, and it was clear that she was overwhelmed with guilt. She admitted that she and Megan had been arguing, but she didn't initially confess to the affair with Tyler. Instead, she focused on how things had escalated quickly, how she and Megan had been yelling, and how Tyler had tried to intervene. She claimed that she had never meant for things to get violent, and that the last thing she wanted was for her daughter to get hurt. But the more Detective Walsh probed, the more cracks began to show in Karen's story. It didn't take long for the affair to come to light. Karen's nervousness during questioning made it clear that she was hiding something, and after hours of pressure from Detective Walsh, she finally broke down and admitted the truth. She told the detective everything: the affair, the lies, the guilt. She explained how it had started innocently enough but had spiraled out of control. She also confessed that Megan had discovered the affair just days before her death, and that the argument they had that night had been about Tyler. Detective Walsh listened carefully as Karen spoke, but it didn't change the fact that Megan was dead and Tyler was responsible. The confession about the affair only made things worse. It painted a clearer picture of the events leading up to the murder and added another layer of betrayal to the already tragic story. Walsh now had a motive for the argument and an explanation for why tensions in the Sullivan household had been so high. The affair had poisoned everything: Megan's relationship with her mother, her relationship with Tyler, and ultimately, her own life. Meanwhile, Tyler sat in a holding cell, awaiting his own interrogation. He hadn't spoken much since his arrest, still in shock over what had happened. When Detective Walsh sat down with him, he was pale and visibly shaken. His hands trembled as he tried to explain his version of events. He said that he never intended to kill Megan, that it had been a terrible accident. He admitted to grabbing the knife, but he insisted that he only did it because the argument had gotten out of hand and he wanted to stop it. Tyler described the scene in the kitchen as chaotic and emotional. Megan had been screaming at both him and Karen, accusing them of destroying her life. He said that in the heat of the moment, he lost control. He didn't realize what he had done until it was too late. The look on Megan's face as she fell to the floor was something he said he would never forget. He claimed he never wanted to hurt her, that he loved her, but the affair had pushed everything beyond the point of no return. Detective Walsh noted Tyler's remorse, but she wasn't convinced that this was just an accident. The fact that he had been carrying on an affair with Megan's mother for months showed a clear pattern of deception and manipulation. Tyler had betrayed Megan in the worst way possible, and while he claimed that the murder wasn't intentional, the evidence suggested otherwise. He had grabbed the knife during the argument, and in a moment of rage, he had taken Megan's life. As the investigation continued, more details about the affair emerged. Friends of the family came forward, revealing that they had noticed odd behavior between Karen and Tyler over the past few months. Rachel Cooper, a close family friend, had seen them together at a neighborhood party, standing too close and talking in hushed tones. She had mentioned it to her husband at the time, but they had both shrugged it off, assuming it was nothing. Now, in hindsight, it was clear that the affair had been going on right under everyone's noses. Liam, Megan's best friend, also gave a statement to the police. He explained how he had been suspicious for a while but hadn't wanted to say anything without proof. When he finally confronted Megan about it, she had been devastated. He told the police about the conversation he had with her just days before her murder, when she had finally admitted that she knew about the affair. Megan had been heartbroken, and she didn't know what to do. She had planned to confront her mother and Tyler, but she had never imagined that it would end in violence. The more the police uncovered, the clearer it became that the affair was at the heart of everything. It had torn the Sullivan family apart, destroyed Megan's relationship with Tyler, and ultimately led to her murder. The betrayal was too much for Megan to handle, and in the heat of the confrontation, it had ended in the worst way possible. As Tyler waited for his trial, the Sullivan family was left to pick up the pieces. Paul was devastated by the loss of his daughter and the betrayal of his wife. He had no idea how to move forward from such a tragedy. Karen, consumed with guilt, spent her days in a state of shock, unable to process what had happened. She knew that she had destroyed her family, and no matter what happened next, there was no way to undo the damage. The community, once tight-knit, was shaken by the crime. Neighbors who had once seen the Sullivans as a picture-perfect family were now left wondering how something so horrible could have happened right next door. The house, once filled with life, was now a dark reminder of the secrets and lies that had led to Megan's death. As the trial approached, everyone involved knew that the story wasn't over. The truth had come out, but the consequences of that truth were still unfolding. Tyler would soon face judgment for what he had done, and Karen would have to live with the guilt of her betrayal for the rest of her life. What had started as a secret affair had spiraled into a tragedy that no one could have predicted, and now there was no escaping the fallout. As the trial of Tyler Reed approached, emotions ran high. The case had become the talk of the town, with people still reeling from the shocking murder of Megan Sullivan. The affair between Karen and Tyler had shocked the community, but now everyone waited to see how the legal system would handle the case. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Journalists, family members, and even curious neighbors crowded in to hear the details that would unfold in the coming days. Tyler's defense attorney, Sarah Matthews, argued that the murder had been an accident. She painted a picture of a young man caught in a heated argument, overwhelmed by guilt and fear, who had grabbed the knife without fully understanding the consequences of his actions. Sarah worked hard to convince the jury that Tyler had no intent to kill Megan. She emphasized that his affair with Karen, while immoral and destructive, did not make him a murderer. Sarah's defense hinged on the idea that Tyler had acted in a moment of panic, not premeditated violence. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Turner, saw things very differently. He argued that the betrayal Tyler had committed both in his relationship with Megan and in his affair with Karen was at the heart of the crime. Turner laid out a detailed timeline of the events leading up to the murder, focusing on how the affair had escalated tensions in the Sullivan household. He argued that Tyler's actions weren't just the result of a heated argument, but a pattern of deceit and manipulation that had spiraled out of control. Turner's case rested on one key element: the knife. He argued that the very act of grabbing the knife during the confrontation showed intent. He explained to the jury that, in moments of rage, people can commit acts they regret, but that doesn't make them any less responsible. Megan's death, in his eyes, wasn't a tragic accident. It was the culmination of months of betrayal, lies, and rising tensions. He aimed to prove that Tyler had crossed a line from emotional manipulation to violence, and that he needed to face justice for his actions. One by one, witnesses were called to the stand. Karen Sullivan's testimony was one of the most anticipated. Her guilt was clear from the moment she walked into the courtroom. The once confident woman was now a shadow of herself, visibly shaking as she took the stand. She struggled to make eye contact with anyone, least of all Paul, who sat quietly in the gallery, his face etched with grief. Karen admitted to the affair, recounting how it had begun and how it had spiraled out of control. She explained how, in the beginning, it had been a way for her to feel wanted again after years of emotional distance in her marriage. But she had never intended for it to hurt Megan. As she spoke about the day of the murder, Karen broke down in tears, her voice shaking as she described the argument that had led to her daughter's death. She admitted that she had been at the center of the storm that destroyed her family. Karen's testimony painted a heartbreaking picture of a mother who had lost everything: her marriage, her daughter, and her own dignity. But despite her tears, the facts remained. Her affair had played a key role in the tensions that led to Megan's murder, and she knew it. She wasn't on trial, but her guilt was written on her face for everyone to see. Paul Sullivan was next to testify. His testimony was brief, but powerful. He described how his marriage had fallen apart, how he had been unaware of the affair, and how the loss of his daughter had shattered him. Paul didn't offer any excuses for what had happened. Instead, he expressed his deep sorrow for the tragedy that had unfolded and his anger at the betrayal by both Karen and Tyler. His words echoed the sentiment of many in the room. How could something like this have happened? The most difficult testimony came from Liam Carter, Megan's best friend. Liam had been one of the last people to speak with Megan before she died. He recounted the conversation they had just days before her death, when Megan had finally admitted that she knew about the affair. Liam described how heartbroken and angry Megan had been, how she had felt betrayed by the two people she loved most. His testimony provided crucial insight into Megan's state of mind leading up to the fatal confrontation. Liam explained how Megan had planned to confront her mother and Tyler, but that she never could have predicted the violence that would follow. His words were a stark reminder of the emotional toll the affair had taken on Megan and how that emotional turmoil had been a direct factor in her tragic death. As the trial continued, the prosecution introduced forensic evidence from the crime scene. The knife, now cleaned and bagged, was presented to the court. The forensic experts explained how the trajectory of the wound indicated that Tyler had used significant force when he stabbed Megan. This was crucial for the prosecution, as they argued that the force of the stab suggested intent, not an accidental action during a struggle. The prosecution also presented the timeline of events based on phone records, which showed how Karen and Tyler had been communicating secretly for months, further proving the depth of the betrayal. Tyler's attorney worked hard to shift the focus back to the emotional state Tyler had been in during the argument. She brought in a psychologist to testify that Tyler had been under immense stress and that his actions were the result of emotional overload, not premeditated intent. The defense's strategy was clear to portray Tyler as a young man who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of extreme pressure. But the jury wasn't convinced. As they listened to the details of the affair, the escalating arguments, and the violent confrontation, it became harder to believe that Megan's murder was just an accident. Tyler had deceived Megan, betrayed her trust, and then, in a moment of rage, he had taken her life. The affair with Karen was more than just a mistake, it was a key factor in the events that led to the murder. The closing arguments from both sides were intense. The defense argued that Tyler was not a monster, but a young man who had gotten in over his head and made a tragic mistake. They asked the jury to consider the emotional toll the situation had taken on everyone involved and to show leniency in their judgment. The prosecution, on the other hand, focused on the cold, hard facts. Megan was dead and Tyler had killed her. The betrayal by both Karen and Tyler had been devastating, but that didn't excuse the violence that followed. The prosecution reminded the jury that while emotions may have run high, Tyler had made the decision to grab the knife and end Megan's life. That was a choice, not an accident, and he needed to be held accountable for it. After several days of testimony and arguments, the jury was sent to deliberate. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as everyone waited for the verdict. Hours passed, and each minute felt like a lifetime to Karen, Paul, and everyone else involved in the case. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood and read the verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Tyler Reed was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. The courtroom erupted in mixed emotions. Some felt justice had been served, while others felt the sentence was too light. For Karen, the sentence didn't matter. No punishment could bring Megan back or undo the damage that had been done. Tyler showed little reaction as the verdict was read. The weight of what he had done seemed to have crushed any emotion he had left. As he was led away in handcuffs, the once charming young man who had caught Karen's attention was now just another criminal, paying the price for a moment of uncontrollable violence. Karen, now left to face the aftermath, knew that she would never escape the guilt of her actions. Her affair with Tyler had destroyed her family, and her daughter was dead because of it. Paul, heartbroken and bitter, had already filed for divorce, and Karen's once quiet suburban life was in ruins. The trial had brought closure in some ways, but for everyone involved, the scars of the betrayal and murder would last a lifetime. The tragedy had shaken the community, a stark reminder of how lies and secrets could lead to devastating consequences. Megan's life had been taken too soon, and the people she had trusted the most had been the ones to destroy her. And now there was no going back. With Tyler Reed behind bars and the trial concluded, the small suburban community tried to return to normal life. But the truth was, nothing would ever be the same for those involved. The fallout from Megan's murder had left deep scars on the people closest to her, and the Sullivan family was shattered beyond repair. The once perfect life that Karen and Paul had built was now in ruins, and the weight of the affair and the murder hung over them like a dark cloud. Paul Sullivan struggled to move forward. Losing Megan had left him devastated, and the betrayal by his wife only deepened his pain. He had always been a hard-working man, focusing on his family and providing for them, But in the wake of the tragedy, he was left questioning everything he had ever known. The family dinners, the vacations, the quiet moments, they all felt like a lie now. Paul had loved Megan more than anything, and he had trusted Karen completely. Now both his daughter and the life he thought he knew were gone. Paul couldn't bear to stay in the house where everything had happened. The memories of Megan were everywhere: her room, her favorite spot at the dining table, the photos on the walls. Each one was a painful reminder of what he had lost. He decided to sell the house and move away, hoping that a change of scenery might offer some relief from the constant reminders of the past. But no matter where he went, Paul knew the grief would follow him. The death of his daughter and the betrayal by his wife were things he would never fully escape. Karen, on the other hand, was left to deal with the guilt that consumed her every waking moment. She had lost everything: her marriage, her daughter, and her own sense of self. The affair with Tyler had seemed exciting at first, a way to escape the loneliness and dissatisfaction she felt in her life. But now, it was clear that it had been the worst mistake she had ever made. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Megan's face. Every time she walked past the kitchen, she remembered the horror of that night, the sight of her daughter's lifeless body on the floor. Karen couldn't go anywhere without feeling the judgment of the people around her. Friends, neighbors, even strangers in the grocery store, everyone knew what had happened. The whispers followed her everywhere, and the looks of pity or disgust were constant. She had become a pariah in her own community, a woman whose choices had led to the ultimate tragedy. She no longer attended neighborhood gatherings or even church services, isolating herself in the house that had become a prison of her own making. The divorce between Karen and Paul was finalized quietly, with no fanfare or drama. Paul didn't want to drag things out. He just wanted to move on with what little life he had left. Karen didn't fight it. She knew she had no right to ask for anything after what she had done. The two parted ways, with nothing left to say to each other. The love they had once shared was buried under the weight of betrayal, and there was no hope of ever rebuilding it. In the weeks and months after the trial, Karen's mental and emotional state deteriorated. She barely ate, barely slept, and spent most days in a haze of regret and guilt. She replayed the events of that night over and over in her mind, wondering how things could have gone so horribly wrong. She had never intended for anyone to get hurt, least of all Megan. But her selfishness, her desire for attention, had set off a chain of events that led to her daughter's death. Megan's friends, especially Liam, struggled to come to terms with the loss. Liam had been so close to Megan, and the guilt he felt for not doing more to protect her was overwhelming. He had tried to warn her about the affair, but in the end, he hadn't been able to stop the tragedy from happening. The grief weighed heavily on him, and he found it difficult to focus on anything else. Every time he thought about Megan, he felt a deep ache in his chest, knowing that she was gone and that he would never see her again. Liam continued to visit Megan's grave regularly, leaving flowers and sitting in silence as he remembered their time together. He had lost not only a best friend but also a piece of himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more, that maybe if he had spoken up sooner, Megan might still be alive. The burden of that guilt was something he carried with him every day, and though people told him it wasn't his fault, he couldn't help but feel responsible. As for Tyler, prison became a daily reminder of his mistakes. The man who had once been so full of confidence and charm was now just another inmate, serving a long sentence for a crime he could never undo. The days were long, and the nights even longer, as he lay in his cell, thinking about the life he had ruined. Tyler had once thought he could have it all: Megan, Karen, the excitement of an affair. But now he was left with nothing but regret. Tyler's remorse was genuine. He knew he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He had destroyed the lives of two people he had claimed to love, and he would spend the next 25 years of his life paying for that mistake. He tried to keep his head down in prison, avoiding trouble and doing what he could to survive. But no matter how many years passed, the memory of that night in the Sullivan home would never leave him. Life for everyone involved in Megan's murder was a constant struggle to move forward. The weight of guilt, grief, and betrayal hung over them like a dark cloud, and there were no easy answers. They all had to live with the choices they had made, knowing that nothing would ever bring Megan back or undo the damage that had been done. Years passed, but the memory of Megan Sullivan's death remained fresh for everyone who had been affected by it. Tyler Reed continued to serve his sentence, but even as the years in prison went by, the guilt never left him. He had grown quieter, more introspective. The time behind bars had forced him to confront the reality of his actions in a way that he hadn't been able to during the trial. Tyler attended therapy sessions in prison, trying to make sense of the choices he had made. He spoke about the affair with Karen, how it had started as something thrilling and new but had quickly spiraled into something dark and destructive. He admitted that he had been selfish, thinking only of his own desires and never once considering the consequences. As the years went on, Tyler came to realize that he had not only destroyed Megan's life but also his own. Karen Sullivan's life became a shell of what it once was. She never remarried, and she never tried to rebuild the life she had lost. The house that she had once shared with her family was sold, and Karen moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. She kept to herself, avoiding social interactions and living in near total isolation. Her days were spent in a fog of regret, constantly haunted by the choices that had led to her daughter's death. Karen visited Megan's grave often, bringing flowers and sitting in silence. She would sometimes speak to Megan as if she were still there, apologizing over and over for what she had done. But no matter how many times she apologized, the pain never went away. She knew she would carry the guilt with her for the rest of her life. Paul Sullivan tried to move forward, but the loss of Megan was something he could never fully overcome. He eventually settled into a small house in a different part of town, far from the memories of the life he had once had. He threw himself into his work, trying to keep his mind occupied, but there were moments when the grief would overwhelm him. Paul had lost not only his daughter but also the life he had built with Karen. The betrayal of his wife had left a deep wound, and though he had tried to forgive her, the pain was still too raw. Liam Carter, too, struggled to move on. He graduated from college, but the weight of Megan's death stayed with him. He carried the memory of their friendship everywhere he went, and the guilt he felt for not doing more haunted him. Liam eventually moved out of town, hoping that a change of scenery might help him heal. But even in a new city, far from the reminders of the past, he couldn't forget Megan. As time passed, the story of Megan Sullivan's murder became a distant memory for most of the community. New families moved into the neighborhood, and life went on as it always does. But for those who had been directly involved, the pain never fully went away. The loss of Megan had changed them all in ways they couldn't have predicted, and they were left to live with the consequences of their actions for the rest of their lives. Megan Sullivan's life had been full of promise, but it had been cut short by a series of selfish choices and betrayals. The affair between Karen and Tyler had been the catalyst for a tragedy that none of them could escape, and though the trial had brought some measure of justice, the emotional scars left behind would never fully heal. In the end, the story of Megan Sullivan's murder was a painful reminder of how easily lives can be destroyed by lies and deceit. The people involved would carry the weight of that night with them for the rest of their lives, knowing that nothing could ever bring Megan back or undo the damage that had been done.